Hi everyone and welcome to SK's e-Shikshalaya, and today we will go on to the next subtopic of French Revolution, and it is the abolition of slavery. So today we will discuss the demand for slaves in the overseas French colonies, the slaves in the plantations, and events that led to the abolition of slavery. There was demand for slaves in the overseas French colonies and especially in the Caribbean to work in the plantations. So, today in this presentation, we will see how the social reforms after the French Revolution contributed towards the abolition of slavery. So this picture is depicting slavery, and you can see how slaves were treated inhumanly. They were chained, they were shackled, and they were beaten. And slavery is the worst form of human exploitation. Now, French had established several colonies in the Caribbean. Some of the most important ones were Martinique, Guadeloupe, and San Domingo. And there were many plantations of coffee, sugarcane, and tobaccos. They were the major suppliers of coffee, indigo, sugar, and tobacco. For that, labor was required, but Europeans were not willing to work on the plantations, and this caused shortage of labor. And so the French decided to ship the slaves from Africa to work in the Caribbean plantations, and this promoted slavery. The triangular slave trade between Europe, Africa, and Americas solved the problem of shortage of labor. So, if I am talking about Americas, it included both the North America and the South America. So now we would elaborate on the triangular trade between Africa, between Americas, and French. So now let's look at the geographical region where the triangular trade was operated, and it was also known as the transatlantic trade. So French sailed from the ports of Bordeaux or Nantes, and then they sailed towards the western part of Africa. From there, they crossed the Atlantic Ocean and they reached the Caribbean islands. So San Domingo, Guadeloupe, and Martinique, they reached there. And from there, they were carrying the raw materials and moving back to France. Now let's look at how commodities were exchanged at each of these places. So the first leg began in France, where cargo of manufactured goods including cloth, weapon, tools, sugar and rum from Americas, they were being carried to Africa, and this cargo was sold or bartered for slave. Then the second leg of journey begins from Africa, where they are taking the slaves to the and carrying them to the Caribbean, and there the slaves were sold in the New World. Then the third leg of the journey begins from where they are carrying the cargo of raw sugar, coffee, rum, and molasses and carrying it back, all these cash crops to France. So at every step, they used to make the profit. And to sum up what has been discussed in the previous slides, slaves were chained and shipped through the Atlantic Ocean to reach the Caribbean islands. The journey took 3 months. Slaves were sold at the plantations. The inhuman exploitation of slaves aided in meeting the growing demands of the Europeans for sugar, coffee, and indigo. Port cities of Bordeaux and Nantes in France prospered. Why? Due to the flourishing slave trade. In the 18th century, there was not much condemnation of slavery in France. But the National Assembly of 1789 did debate on the extension of rights of man to French subjects, even in the overseas colonies. But no laws were passed. Why? Because because they feared that businessmen would oppose as their incomes depended on the slave trade. One of the major social reform of the Jacobin government was the abolition of slavery in the French colonies. So let us look at the sequence of events that led to the abolition of slavery. In 1794, the convention declared to free all slaves in the French colonies. But it was only for a short term. 10 years later, Napoleon introduced the slavery again. Slavery persisted because of the plantation owners enslaving the African Negroes. Because for plantation owners, their freedom meant the right to enslave African Negroes to pursue their economic interest. Negro, a term which is used for the indigenous people of Africa south of the Sahara, and it is a derogatory term not in common use any longer. Eventually, after a lot of struggles, slavery was abolished in 1848 in the French colonies. This is for your reference. This is all for today, and today we have discussed about the slave trade, how this trade has helped the French economy to flourish, and also the events that led to the abolition of slavery. Thank you.